Hello everyone, Julie Stitches Vintage here with a new project. These little baskets are made from cutter quilts. They're lined, they have little handles, and some embellishments. What I love about these is I've got a lot of cutter quilts and I just can't bear to throw them out. They've got to be used for something. And these little baskets are perfect. They go together really quickly. You can use them in your sewing room. They'd be great for a nursery to just hold burp claws, and they're so perfect. And what I loved about doing these, besides the fact that they're quick, is even if your cutter quilt has some torn spots, this is the perfect place to put a little embellishment. So this one is covering up something on the top, and this one up here, there was a little spot. So you can use these little embellishments. So as I said, they're quick and easy to do, and I'm going to show you how I make them. Okay, here's a way that you can make your pattern for your little basket. You want to start with a square, and it works really well if you can divide it by thirds. So you could 9 by 9, 12 by 12, 15 by 15, which is the one that I have used, which then creates a 5 by 5 inch basket. So this is what your pattern would be that you would cut out of your quilt or other fabric that you have. I'll show you how I cut it out, but here's a tip. If you cut the square first and then cut your corners, you will have corners that are quilted that you could sew into a basket or make them into coasters or something else. So there's other uses that you can have. Now I'll show you how I use my template and my quilt to cut out my basket. So I looked through my vast ruler collection to find the biggest one I had, and I had one that was 15 by 15. And so that was a great start. I also, because we're going to cut out the corners like this that aren't part of your basket, I put tape here so that when I lay this on top of my quilt, I can fussy cut and get the right designs that are part of this particular basket. So here's the quilt we're going to use for our basket. Ordinarily, when you're fussy cutting, you kind of think about the center and what design you want there. However, that design is going to be on the bottom. So because of that, we may want to play around with this a little bit differently. So I'm going to look here. So I put a little sticker from my embroidery accessories to mark the center. And now I can see that when I make a basket, we're going to have this piece, this piece, this piece, this piece coming up the sides. And here's an example of one where I did that. It came up the sides. And I think that looks pretty good. So I think that's the way we're going to do this one. Let's cut this out. I've got it where I'd like, kind of evenly spaced on the sections that will become the basket. So we're going to give it a cut here. Try not to cut myself because blood's really hard to get out of quilts. I'm going to cut the rest of this out, and then I'll show you how I cut out the corners really easily. All right, I've got this nifty little 5.5 inch ruler. So if I position it so that we've got it a 5 inch square, we are good to go. Now, a tip, be careful when you're cutting so you don't cut further than the 5 inches. You can kind of correct for it when you're sewing your seams, but it's just easier if you don't do that. Okay, do this one. And as you can see, you've got great squares to use for other things. In fact, I started, here it is, well, yeah. I started one with those extra pieces. You've got some Y seams that you have to handle, but other than that, it went together really easily. And I just need to line this one and put the little handles on it. but these also would make pretty cute coasters, because you also will have 5-inch squares of your lining material. So how easy would that be? Just zip, zip, zip around there, leave a space for turning, turn it right side out, and do some top stitching. And wouldn't that be cute to go in the baskets for your gift? Oh my gosh, I love that. So I think I'll be working on those this afternoon. Okay, I'm going to finish cutting this and then get the sewing machine set up. Oh, and then we have to cut our lining, which we will do exactly the same way. So I'll cut the lining, set up the sewing machine, and show you how it goes together. We've got our, let's get ready to sew. We've got our outside piece. I've got the lining cut. I picked it, the pink, because it kind of picks the pink in this particular quilt top. You're going to take one of your squares, which is 5 by 5, and cut it in half, because these are going to become your handles. So I press it in half, fold the sides to the center, give it a press, and then we're going to stitch down one side and up the other. So then we'll have our handles. Okay, so the way we sew this is we put right sides together, sort of forming a V, and we're going to stitch this side and this side. Then we will fold it and do the other sides, and then you will have formed a cool little basket. One really nice thing about working with this quilted fabric is it's very forgiving. So I'm usually pretty careful about lining up my edges. It's forgiving, so if it's a little short, you're good, but it also can stretch. So I tend to start at the end and stitch towards the middle. And I just use clips to hold it a little bit. I'm going to use a 1/4-inch seam. So I'm going to do that with the top. And then I'll come back and show you a little bit about how we do the lining, because we've got to leave a space so we can turn it. And then we'll put it together, and you'll be amazed how quickly you're finished. All right, so I've got the two sides sewn together. I open it up, pair the other two sides, and we're going to sew those up. Okay, we've got our basket, the quilted outside completed, starting to look like a basket. And I've got the lining sewed together with the exception of one seam, and I pressed the seams open. It works a little easier that way. It's a little harder to do with the quilted fabric, but you can give it a shot. Okay, so we're going to leave a couple inches open on this side for turning purposes. Now, one thing that I tried with one of the baskets was sewing the lining completely closed and then leaving a spot open on the basket, figuring I could turn it and then we're going to top stitch it. It did not work well. It might work great with regular fabric, but it did not work well with quilted fabric. So I preferred this method. So we stitch down a few inches. Be sure to back stitch on all of your stitches. And then we'll come down here. It's a little thick for turning, so I leave a little bit more space than maybe for some things that you make. All right. Let's clip some threads. Now clip the fabric. I've done that before in my haste. All right, so I'm going to sew one of these and then I'll show you how we attach it to the basket and put in our lining. And so I'm just going to line the presser foot on the right with the edge of the fabric here. Pretty easy to do. And then, so I don't have to stop and start, I'll just come to the, go around the edge. And go around this edge, which is not essential, however, it makes it easy to cut off the threads because they're all together. So one pull and they're done. Okay, I'm going to do the other one and then I will come back and show you how to attach them to the basket. Then we'll put in the binding, we'll put in the lining and finish this cutie up. Okay, let's attach our handles. We've got to first determine which is going to be the front. So I kind of look at it and look for places where the fabric from the quilt is really worn. So here's an example, and you can see it's not quite straight. So we'll just trim that. So we've got a little bit of wear here and here. So I really don't want to put the handle here over this because likely this is where I'm going to put a little doily or something. There's a little here, and so a doily may go there, or what I have done with some is I've cut a little piece of fabric from the quilt, peeled it off the backing and just left the piece of fabric and just hand sewed it on there because it's scrappy, right? So we're going to use this as the front, and then this would be the front or back. It doesn't really matter. So that means we're going to put our handles on the side. We want to put them sort of equidistant from your seams. And what I like to do is do about 1 inch. So let's see, that's a little bit more. Let's scoot that over just a tad. We'll do that there. Same thing here. Whoops. Don't put 2 of them on that side. You just twist this around. Check our measurements again. I really want to twist a little, so we're going to stitch these into place. Okay. I'm going to turn it inside out because it's a little easier to stitch. And I'm just going to use probably about 1/8 of an inch. And I hold the little handle so that it doesn't pull and get uneven. Be careful with my pins. Isn't that the first thing they taught us in sewing class in like junior high? Don't sew over your pins. And how many times have I done it and broken a needle? Which is why I buy them by the hundreds, because you just never know. All right, so there's one. So I'm going to do the other one, and then we'll talk about putting the lining in. Okay, we've got our handles sewn on, and we've got our lining ready to go. So I have right side of the basket is turned inward, and then the lining, the right side is on the outside so that we can do right sides together. All right, so put that in there. Grab some clips, and I start at each of the seams. I press the seams open with my fingers and use a clip. And I do that first because, like we talked about in the beginning, old quilts can stretch, and we want to make sure we don't have any puckers, and then we kind of adjust as we go here. That one. And then this one finally. And it really doesn't matter where your opening is on your lining, just as long as you remember it. You can ask me how I know that. It's easy to forget when you're sewing quickly. All right, so I can already see that the lining's a little shorter than the quilt. So I'm going to pin it in a couple of places and just sort of ease it in. Another one of those terms we learned in home ec about easing in extra fabric, like when we did sleeves and things like that. Boy, that takes me back. How fun was home ec? Wouldn't it be fun if we could go to home ec class now, every day? And maybe that is kind of what we're doing when we sit at our sewing machines. Okay. This one fits pretty well. And you're going to make sure that your handles are tucked inside between the quilt and the lining. Now, if you end up getting a little pucker in your quilt, it's really not going to matter. But just to be on the safe side, we're going to see how well we can do this. All right, we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam. And I love my seam guide ruler from Madame Sew. It works so well. I liked it so well, I bought another one so that when I'm looking around for this one somewhere in my mess and can't find it, I know I've got another one in my drawer. All right, so I'm gonna sew with the, and it really doesn't matter, but with the quilt on the bottom and the lining on the top. And we're gonna do a 1/4 inch seam, and we're gonna go all the way around. And as you do, just kind of make sure that your lining is sort of matched up to the edge of the quilt. When you get, oh, I've got one of these here. So reach in here. When you get to your corners or the seams, it can be a little thick. So if you have one of these pointy things, that can work great. And we go all the way around. So I'm going to go around and finish this, and then I'll show you what we do when we flip it right side out and the top stitching that we get to do. Alrighty, so I've got that sewed all around. Pull the lining out. Just clipping a few threads, and then we've got our space to turn it. And I always think, oh, I've left plenty of room. It's going to be really easy, until I start and realize the quilt is pretty darn heavy. So while I'm turning this up, I'll tell you a couple of things. I made one basket with a quilt, a cutter quilt top, and it was really thin. And so I added a layer of batting, the iron-on Hobbs 80/20 batting, and just to give it a little bit more body, and I think that worked out really well. So if you end up with something that's really thin, you know, don't be afraid to add the batting between your quilt top. Come on out of there, your quilt top and your lining. And I didn't sew it down or anything because it was, because of it being the iron on, it made it really easy. I have another really cool quilt top I want to use, but it's super thick, and I'm just starting to wonder if it's going to be too thick for. I'm glad you get to see that I struggle with this, because you may too, and you're like, oh yeah, that's just how it goes. All right, a few threads here. So look at that, it's so cute. Okay, so we've got our little opening here. So I'm going to, you could hand sew it. I'm being lazy today, so I'm going to machine stitch it. I'm going to press it a little bit. So I'm going to stitch that, and then I'm going to come back and show you how we top stitch the around the top or the edge, and you will have a finished quilted basket. All right, so I've got that stitch closed. Now we're going to tuck a lining in here. If you made the lining bigger, you could probably leave a little edge of a really cute trim if it was a little taller. That might be phase 2. All right, so then I'm just carefully pressing with finger pressing. Now I'm going to show you a quick trick here. Grab a tool. Hammers are usually used for other things, but in this case, we are going to use it to smash these seams. Okay. They get really thick and they're hard to sew over. So I got a little cutting board, and this was from Making Memories. Oh, from my scrapbooking hobby. And then I kind of go around, put the little things in, and it's already, that really smushed it down, and it will make it a much nicer top stitching. So I've done this at quilt retreats. People always hear this knocking and wondering, what the heck am I doing over in the corner? And when I've showed people how well it works, I think everybody went out and bought their own little hammer. Sorry, that's probably pretty loud on this video. Now you can feel like you're at a retreat with all the other hammers. All right, flip. Just grab a pin here, there. All right. And let's do top stitching here. And then we can admire our beautiful work. We can talk about, you know, what embellishments do we want to put on them. Because I like to sew the top stitching on the part that will show, and it can be difficult. Let's see if we can do it this way. Yeah, we can. Sometimes I'll turn it inside out, and that makes it a little easier. All right. And I'm gonna just top stitch it with the right edge of the presser foot along the edge. We'll press right here. Oops, tuck those out. And there it went right over that. Very fluffy seam, thanks to a little hammer time. Okay, we're going to sew around here, and I will come back and show you the final result. Okay, let's talk about some embellishments. We've got it done, and it's so cute. Just love it. And I love that we're taking a quilt that might have ended up in a landfill and given it another purpose. I just love that. Okay, so here's some embellishments of things you could do, and we can still do this on this one. So this one, as I said, has some torn areas. So we could attach this vintage lace. In fact, that's probably what I'm going to do. Here's one where I added some vintage rickrack. And this one, I did this before I actually sewed it all together, is I wanted something purple and found this particular doily and put that there. But you could also, we could do a doily here, tuck it over so that it covers it. We could do a small doily in the front. The choice is yours. So here's something that I did that I thought was really fun, is I took a piece of this quilt. This is the one that I added batting to make it a little stiffer. Took a piece, cut it out, added the backing fabric, and I just sewed it together and used my pinking shears and added a little vintage girl stamp. And I think that just turns out so cute. So I may do that for some of the other ones. Another thought was add some vintage buttons. So I just took some yarn and threaded it through some vintage glass buttons and tied that to the side. Let's see. Yeah, I think those are the ideas that I've come up with so far, but I can imagine that when you start making these, you're going to come up with great ideas, and I hope you will share them because we all want to learn from each other. So, happy basket making, happy saving cutter quilt tops from the landfill and giving them a new life. Always check out Julie Vintage Stitches at bigcartel.com if you're interested in some of the things I've made. And check out the YouTube channel and Julie Stitches Vintage on Facebook. Thanks so much.